Exactly 10 o'clock, I'd like to call the meeting between the Finance and Infrastructure Committee and the HR Committee to order. First item is the declaration of a quorum.
Okay, good morning. I'll take attendance for the Finance Committee. Rich Balducci.
Here.
David Bliss.
Present.
Elise Gray Kemp.
Here.
Thank you. David Jimenez. Joanne Ryan.
I'm here, thank you.
Ari Santiago. Ari, are you there?
Sorry, you're right. I don't see Ari yet.
Okay, and for the HR and Administration, Naomi Town.
Here.
Elise Wright.
Here.
Thank you.
Rich Balducci is also here.
Yes, I see that you are here and David is still absent. Okay, thank you. So we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much for that. I would like to move approval of the previous Finance Committee meeting of December 2nd. Is there a motion?
So move, Felice.
Thank you. Second? Thanks, Joanne. Any comments on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Minutes are adopted. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Ari Santiago has joined you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ari. We'd now like to move on to the minutes of the HR administration meeting. Naomi?
Good morning, everyone. Before you are approval of the minutes of the HR meeting in September, they're previously distributed. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
So moved, or second.
Moved by Rich, seconded by Elise. Are there any comments? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are adopted as written.
Thank you, Naomi. Now we're going to move on to information items, and the first item deals with the regional president update. Naomi, would you care to go into that for the members and for the board and for the finance committee members and the HR committee members?
Naomi, you're muted.
I got it now. Thank you. Good morning again. From time to time, the work of the HR and admin committee overlaps with the work of other committees, and that's what brings us together yet again this morning to talk about the work of the regional presidents. You'll probably notice finance committee members a particular interest in the financial impact of some of the work that our regional presidents have been doing. So with thanks to Presidents Coley and Lumbella and Steinmetz, let's move to a 15-minute discussion, hearing from them about their work. I know they have a PowerPoint which will be attached to our minutes and distributed. So thank you very much, and gentlemen, it's all yours.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for taking some time to hear about the good work that we're doing in our regions throughout the state. I'm Rob Steinmetz. I'm the Capital East Region President, and Presidents Coley and Lumbella will introduce themselves as they go through their two sections of our presentation. But if we can move into the next slide, we're going to begin with a discussion about the overall impact of the work, particularly looking at as a reminder of the responsibilities of the regional president and some examples of our specific work. Then we'll talk about the work in workforce development and finish with our finance work. So here's an overall kind of summary of those impacts. So with the regional structure, we've been looking at ways to improve the student experience and accelerate collaboration, which we'll go into more detail on. With workforce, a dramatic increase in grant funding has occurred, and we have increased the recognition that we've received at state and national levels, as well as continuing to expand our work at the local level. And finally, looking at finance specifically, we've increased efficiencies and reduced expenses, and we have increased collaboration and innovation with our first opportunity to have a regionalized budgeting structure because of the way we've been able to operationalize our work. If you'll go to the next slide, you'll see the current regional structure as it stands today. So the 3 regional presidents have the CEOs from each of the campuses. Capital East has 5 campuses, Northwest has 4, and Shoreline West has 3. And so each of those CEOs are reporting up to the regional presidents. And then we have workforce development officers and chief finance officers that are reporting up as, and that creates a regional team at this point. And you'll see some of the great impacts that we've had. Going to the next slide, we have the role of the regional president. So just as a reminder, we really are focusing on a number of key areas to help make sure that we're supporting the work that's happening throughout the state. So first and foremost, we continue to prioritize improving student access and success. We are providing leadership and support for the campus CEOs and the campuses themselves. We're working closely with the CEOs and leadership of the foundations to help support their work at the local level on increasing resources and making decisions on how best to support our students. We've got great examples of that during this time of COVID and some great innovations that the foundations worked through to make sure that we were supporting our students during this unique time. We're supporting change management related to students first, and we're engaging with stakeholders at national, state, and local levels to make sure that we're moving forward support for our campuses and for the system as a whole. If you'll go to the next slide, I will only highlight for time a couple of areas. You'll see many examples of innovation related to our regional work. But looking at COVID, for fall 2020, the 3 regional presidents were asked to chair and create a comprehensive plan related to reopening in fall 2020. So, for example, I chaired how to best move forward with shared student support services and wraparound services for our students during this time. President Coley chaired an academics and enrollment management group to talk about how to continue to move forward with rigorous academic work and support our students in enrolling and being supported during this time. And finally, President Lambella chaired a technology, operations, and logistics group. And you can see reports from that came out online. And this regional approach to be able to have both statewide leadership and overarching work, but also support what's happening at the local level and really be able to provide deep leadership support for our campuses are things that just couldn't be done before a regional structure existed. Another example is that we have been heavily involved in workforce investment boards and the Governor's Workforce Council. We served on committees and subcommittees related to that. And we were really pleased with the level of support and integration of the community colleges we saw in the Workforce Council report that has come out. And we continue to work on committees that are supporting that work. And I think that that's a great transition into talking about more specifics related to our workforce. And I will turn it over to President Lambella for that part.
Excellent. Well, thank you, President Steinmetz, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Lambella, and I'm the regional president for the Northwest region, which consists of Nantucket, Naugatuck Valley, Northwestern Connecticut, and Tunx's community colleges. And I want to thank the regions for the opportunity to give an update today. Having been in our community college system going on 12 years now, and having served as a president for one institution and a dual president for 2 institutions for several years, I'm excited to share our regional workforce structure. I quickly discovered that in this role, a role at the 10,000-foot view, we're able to identify resources and best practices that we would not see focusing in on just one institution at a time. We've held regional-wide veteran service support events, adjunct recruitment events, and now seat sharing across our campuses as opposed to canceling classes for low enrollment at our smaller institutions, increasing access to education and services. These are just some examples to name a few. Now moving on to slide number 8 and detailing our new regional workforce structure, I'm excited to introduce in our Northwest region, Eileen Peltier has been in our system for nearly 8 years and has overseen the workforce development and CE divisions at multiple colleges, including Tungus Nuntuck. She has administered millions of dollars in grant funding and an advocate for higher education with a congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. She's the 2020 winner of the American Council of Education Distinguished Women in Higher Education Award for her work supporting women in education, including the co-founding of the Women's Leadership Institute. Eileen, take a quick wave for the audience here today. In our North Shore West region, after 15 years with the City University in New York, Diane Christina Testabuzzi began her tenure with the Connecticut Community Colleges as Director of Grant-Funded Family of Economic Programs in Norwalk in 2008. She then advanced to the Dean of Workforce Development and Community Partnerships at Norwalk and was appointed as a second-gen state advisory board and served on many system-wide committees. So please, Christina, take a wave to the audience as well. And lastly, in our Capital East region, Diane Bordano started her career with the community colleges in 2008 as the Allied Health Coordinator and registered nurse to set standards and develop new programs in the allied health field. She became the director of the non-credit programs in 2015 and developed a strategic vision and plan to bring new strong community partnerships to the college. She was instrumental in developing the college's partnership with Pierre Olson Veterinarian Hospital and collaborated with Eversource Energy to offer the first national gas field technician certificate program in Connecticut. So take a wave, Diane, as well. We truly are thrilled to have these 3 individuals representing our 12 institutions at the local, state, and national level. Moving on to slide number 9, this really demonstrates the vertical management structure, which allows consistency for sharing of best practices and collaboration. The continuing education and business and industry directors report directly to our workforce development officers with a dotted line to the campus CEO and leadership. Moving on to slide number 10. There we go. The role of the Chief Regional Workforce Officers, really, I'm not going to cover every bullet on these slides as well for time, but we are going to share the deck with the regions. But expanding student access to workforce development, really our officers by securing new student funding streams throughout the state, by staggering start dates of programs across the region so that students don't get put on waiting lists for weeks and months at a time, and by merging classes across campuses such as the Pharmacy Tech program that actually is starting this week and will have students enrolled from 3 campuses across our system. They provide strategic leadership to campus workforce development. An example, by securing the regional and statewide opportunities for funding and technical support to strengthen the delivery of programs and services. As an example, 8 of the community colleges are being considered for a study by the Federal SNAP Employment and Training Program to determine the impact of small-scale, low-cost interventions on student outcomes. Another example is the recent Strengthening Community Colleges Training Grant for $3.4 million. Moving on as well, creating new partnerships and growing in-demand workforces. The creation of 3 regions has had a tremendous impact on the level of collaboration between all of our campuses and our region. Moving on to the next slide. Slide number 11 gives examples of regional workforce development initiatives. Back 1 slide. Sorry about that, Ben. Right there. So creating workforce development staff who meet to replicate successful models. So these teams are meeting across all of our campuses, securing grant funding. In the first 6 months on the job, the 3 workforce officers have secured more than $6 million in grant funding for CSCU. And now we're seen as a nimble, responsive partner that can quickly respond to requests and opportunities. And if we move on to the next slide now. This is a great example, feedback from our partners. So to me, really, the proof is hearing what the other partners are saying across the state, what other agencies. Alex Johnson, president of Capital Workforce Partners, gave us an example here of how streamlined and how easy it is to work with the 3 regions and not having to work with 12 separate institutions. And also we had a feedback from Bernie Park, a partner in SVP and a member of the Governor's Workforce Council. I'll let everybody read the statements as time allows, because we will have a copy of the deck. But funders are telling us it's much easier to write 3 regional proposals as opposed to 12 separate proposals. We're working very closely with the Governor's Workforce Council across the state's workforce needs. And our workforce officers and regional presidents participated on different subcommittees of the Governor's Workforce Council, also taking part in the regional sector partnerships being built with industry and stakeholders as well. And if we move to the next slide, this gives really an example of the $6 million worth of grants that I've talked about that they've brought in the last 6 months. So you'll see everything from dealing with the Hartford for Foundation for Public Giving, Capital Workforce Partners, dealing with the Governor's Workforce Council on the grant funds that are available, the State Apprenticeship Initiative, the Strengthening Community Colleges grant for $3.4 million that came in. And if you go to the next slide, you'll continue to see DOL grants, working with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and we certainly could get into these details and all the details on this at a later date, but we wanted to share the exciting and really the progress of bringing in over $6.6 million in the first 6 months with our new regional workforce structure. Really is something to be excited about and truly demonstrates how our workforce, continuing education, and business and industry divisions are truly our revenue generating arms of our institutions. And now handing off, next slide, to President Coley.
Thanks, President Lombella. Good morning, everyone. This is Thomas Coley, Shoreline West Region President. That includes Gateway Community College, Norwalk Community College, and Housatonic Community College. I too want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to meet with you and give overview of what's been happening through the regional structure and the quality people we've brought on board to help us. In focusing on the chief regional fiscal officers and structures, I want to first introduce, if we go to the next slide, to the chief regional fiscal officers and give a little background on them. Jennifer Gray is the chief regional officer for the Capital East region and has spent the past 20 years working in higher education. She joined the CSCU system in 2010 after spending the first half of her career at Western New England University, working in various accounting and finance positions. Prior to her current role as regional CFO, Jen served as the director of finance for Asnuntuck Community College. Gennaro DeAngelis joined the CSCU system in 2003 and has held a variety of positions in both enrollment, revenue management, and finance at several community colleges and the system office. He joined UConn in 2010, where he managed the university's $50 million campus-based aid budget, in addition to building predictive revenue forecasting models for senior university management. Since returning to CSCU in 2014, Gennaro served as CFO/Dean of Administration for both Asnuntuck and community colleges prior to assuming his current position as Northwest Regional CFO last spring. And Carrie McGee-Uriff is the Chief Regional Officer for the Shoreline West region. She has been at CSU since 2008, serving in the role of Director of Finance and Administration at Norwalk Community College. Prior to her 12 years at Norwalk, Carrie has 21 years of senior level finance, operational accounting, and administration experiences in the health insurance, oil refining, and consumer products industries. We're truly fortunate to have these talented individuals on the team. They're present at the meeting, and just want to acknowledge that since we hired them as in their current roles in the spring, they've made a tremendous impact, which I will go into later. The next slide. We just want to give you a sense of the construct for where the CFOs fit in regionally, reporting to the regional president, but also the directors of finance currently have a dotted line to the regional CFOs with a solid line to the campus CEO's president. Also, the regional CFOs have a dotted line to Connecticut State Community College CFO. Next slide. So the role of the chief regional fiscal officers is to provide strategic financial analysis and support for regional and campus leadership. They formulate long-term strategic planning for financial and physical resources, and they work with leadership at all levels of the organization to develop budget proposals. They're very gifted at utilizing business analytics and database resources to prepare budget performance reports and dashboards for senior and campus management, and they perform budget analysis and projections and identify developing areas for review. Next slide, please. So we have examples, it says examples of regional financial innovation, but really the focus is on how effective the CFOs have been in the regional structure, but the college structure overall, and the opportunities that they have to make, help us make major change and decisions throughout the year. First example is analyzing costing with IR related to advanced manufacturing technology programs. The CFOs and IR institutional research staff analysis was conducted as part of a comprehensive report to the Governor's Workforce Council to highlight our capacity to meet demands and costs of delivering training for a skilled workforce in advanced manufacturing. Through this approach, we now have a starting basis for analyzing costs associated with credit and non-credit programs in and among our campuses. Secondly, it created efficient and consistent communication between campuses and regions and senior management, and established a shared top priority with goal and systemic financial stability. The CFOs have helped to streamline adoption of finance administrative structures for shared services critical to the realization of student first and the Connecticut State Community College. For example, the regional CFOs have collaborated with the finance administration to help implement payroll, purchasing, accounts receivable, payable, and fixed asset management shared services. Achieving standardization and reducing replication has helped to produce important organizational and some of the transactional processing details that were previously on the campuses and allow for consistencies across campuses and regions. Also, the streamlining processes will provide the infrastructure and efficiencies required to direct services towards programs critical to front-facing support for our students. Next, we've achieved significant savings shared services position and just sharing positions among campuses within a region, particularly in terms of campuses savings associated with regional sharing of resources rather than duplicating them are now in excess of $1 million annually. Tapping existing expertise has produced obvious economic benefits, but also reduced ramp-up time on a multitude of projects and initiatives by virtue of capitalizing on approaches that have proven to be effective elsewhere within the system, that is, capitalizing on best practices. Next is the scaled, highly complex budgeting and accounting solutions. The CFOs have become competent users of the system's business analytic tools for finance and have since endeavored to create a variety of tools designed to inform and drive management decisions towards desirable outcomes, such as revenue dashboards, enrollment revenue trends, and most significantly affected by the pandemic and operating expenses analysis and reconciliation. The regional presidents have applied strategic data-driven standards to both revenue and expenditures forecasting. Again, these standards were applied consistently across campuses and regions. From here, we can make better informed strategic decisions towards a common goal of sound and hopefully achieve a long-term structural financial stability. Finally, with the help of the CFOs, we created greater agility in responding to budget needs. The regional CFOs have collaborated to apply consistent quantitative standards and business practices in the formulation of college budgets. This has been especially helpful during a budget cycle made exceedingly difficult due to COVID-19 to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since spring 2020, the regional budgets have undergone significant changes due to multiple mandated spending cuts, constant projection revisions resulting from unprecedented pandemic-related pressures on revenues and expenditures and enrollment. In addition to complex cost accounting, resource allocations, and compliance issues related to the 2 rounds of federal COVID relief stimulus payments. The regional structure has dramatically created, through the CFOs, contributed to reducing bureaucratic touch points and unnecessary layers of managerial approval. And this has allowed for consistent and timely consensus regarding how best to move forward from a strategic planning perspective when responding to enrollment shifts and related marketplace pressures, such as with the pandemic and economic conditions that we are now facing. So that concludes our report. As been stated, that you will get the deck for the presentation, but if there's time, we can entertain questions and any points for discussion.
Felice Graycamp has a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Coley. Excellent presentation. And, you know, one of the things that you mentioned that really struck accord with was you were talking about the monetary savings as well as the efficiencies. And from where I sit, they're part of the same piece because there's a dollar value added to the removal of iteration and inefficiency. So I see that, whereas others would see that as a soft cost. That's a very real, tangible tax that the organization would otherwise pay. And I would like to know from your vantage and others, if they wish, do you believe that relative to where we'd hope to be, that the characterization, the capture, the data around what is being saved and made more efficient is about where or farther along or a little bit behind where you thought you'd be prior to COVID?
I can answer that just from, Ben probably could give the overview from a system standpoint, but I would just say from a personal note, you know, with the work that we've been doing with the regions, with the CEOs and the directors of finance along up to the CFOs for the college system, that at least we feel that we're moving and making progress in terms of being able to identify issues and work through how we will address whether it comes to our mid-year budget reductions or looking more strategic long term. We're beginning to think how to be more mindful and looking at factors that we need to consider rather than being reactionary. So that's a broad statement, but I'll leave it to perhaps some of the CFOs. They would like to say something more, or my colleagues, regional presidents, but I think we are making progress.
Thank you, Doctor.
Just a quick question, kind of off of Felice's comment, if you like. Again, I would agree that you folks have done an outstanding job, but my concern is expenses, and it seems that you have many things in the pipeline, especially elimination and consolidation out there. But are there any projections as to how much or how many dollars, so to speak, this will save us as we move forward?
We have not put projections for our region, but I believe the CFOs have worked with the CFOs at the Connecticut State and with the CSCU. I don't have a figure for that.
Chair Balduzzi and Chair Cohen, we have another question from David Litz.
Thank you. I found the presentation quite interesting, and it seems a prima facie argument for regionalization, which if successful, could be an example even for the municipalities in Connecticut. which are notoriously lacking of regional cooperation and resulting inequities between the richer and the poorer ones. But I also note that all this was done in the context of the 12 fully accredited community colleges as headed by CEOs. And so the question which I have is, especially in the context of the search for a new CSCU president, would it not be appropriate to pause students first at this level of regionalization, where you seem to be having, at least prima facie, some significant successes, rather than continuing on to the area which is the most contentious one, namely the consolidation of the community colleges into one community college with the elimination of their independent accreditations?
David, it's Naomi Cohn, if I may. I understand your question, as I'm sure does Chair Balducci. I think that really is not a question for this joint committee meeting. Decisions about the CSCU presidency are being addressed at the full board level. And I would suggest to you that you share your question with our board chair and vice chair, and we can discuss that at a meeting other than this one.
Well, thank you, Naomi. I was just sort of practicing, I guess.
Oh, I
But
don't
do
think you
wanna-
need any practice, David.
But I do want to just make this further comment. There is this question, perhaps philosophical, but I think it has practical implications, of the relationship between central, regional, and local activity and authority. And I think an interesting argument has been made for the importance of the regional level at today's meeting. And I congratulate the three presidents for the presentations that they made and for the PowerPoint. But I do also want to mention that it seems to me that we need to avoid over-centralization and delocalization to have a proper balance and harmony between the central, the regional, and the local. And I think that's a theme to which I wish to return. I just bring it up as a sort of philosophical comment.
If there are no other comments or questions, let me, on behalf of both committees, thank not only our regional presidents, but our chief regional fiscal officers for being with us today. It's obvious that your presentation will give the regents and others a lot of food for thought and information to digest. The slides will be attached to our minutes, and I hope posted on our website as well. And I know that this is not the last time that we will be talking about all the work that went into this and the work that you continue to do on a daily basis. So thank you very much. And I turn the meeting back to you, Regent Balducci.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for that outstanding report. I think it was very important and very insightful. Moving along, we're going to do the program report, which we do at least annually when it's required. And Keith will give us an update on that. Keith, would you be so kind as to go through that and take any questions if there are any?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. You have submitted to you the CSCU 2020 semi-annual report, which the period runs through November of 2020. On the report, the program, again, it's $1,069,500,000.
Keith, can you speak into the microphone? I can't hear you now.
Yeah, I'm trying. I have a little technology problem. Can you hear me any better?
No, I can hear you. But...
Okay, I'll speak up very loud. So of the $1 billion, $69 million program, we've spent $837 million. We've committed and don't have spent another $100 million and have about $136 million remaining on the program. Since the last report, we have spent $36 million. So we're basically winding this program down. We're not going to receive any more funds. The program was approved through FY21, And of the remaining dollars, they will be spent over the next couple of years on the new engineering building at Central, Bernard Hall renovations, the completion of that project, and a project under design right now, Borough Library renovations and additions. And also at Southern Health and Human Services, which is under construction, and the construction of a new business school that will start this summer. There's some miscellaneous dollars that'll be spent on deferred maintenance and equipment. Other than that, we'll be working over the next couple of years to close this program out. That concludes the report unless you have questions.
Any questions for Keith? Hearing none. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate that. And we'll catch up.
Excuse me, Chair Balducci, we have a question from David Blitz again.
David.
Sorry, my hand should have been down. I think Keith
Sorry.
has made a very compact and persuasive argument or presentation. I have no further questions.
Thanks, David. Okay, with that, we'll move right along. Ben has several items we're going to be going over. The first is the hiring of Connecticut State Community Colleges in the current fiscal year. Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Forgive me, a little slow. So I'm going to introduce Terry Kelly, the Chief Financial Officer of Connecticut State Community College, to give the report on the hiring in the college, which starts here. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Good morning, members. My name is Carrie Kelly. I'm the interim Vice President of Finance and Administration, Chief Financial Officer for the Connecticut State Community College. I joined the system this past May. Previously, I was with the Governor's Budget Office for about 10 years. And before that, I was with the legislature's nonpartisan fiscal office for about 15. I'm here to talk with you this morning about Students First. As you know, in 2017, the Board of Regents adopted Students First to improve unacceptable student outcomes, improve enrollment, and achieve financial stability. And we know these goals of Students First are more important than ever. Next slide. In May of 2020, the Board of Regents named the Connecticut State Community College and appointed the leadership team. And in June, we adopted the original budget, which provided $14.8 million for personnel and fringe benefits. But due to fiscal distress across the system, in October, the FY21 budget was revised downward by $4.4 million, or about 30% to $10.4 million. However, through prudent management and by delaying or deferring staff hiring, we believe we can achieve an additional $1.9 million in personnel and fringe benefit expenditures this current fiscal year. Next slide. Let me tell you a little bit about the hiring at the Connecticut State Community College. In the current year, we have hired or transferred 37 staff to build the college infrastructure. 7 of these staff are members of bargaining units and 30 are management exempt. The vast majority of them have come from within the CSCU, where we know we have a lot of talent to draw on. Only 5 are new to the system. Let me tell you a little bit more about the 37 staff we've hired. 4 are executive staff. They're there to build the infrastructure for the one college. They include the interim president, the interim provost, the vice president of enrollment management and student affairs, and myself. You heard a little bit this morning about the regional structure that represents 12 staff members, the 3 regional presidents, 3 regional workforce officers, 3 regional finance officers, and 3 administrative assistants. We've hired 9 people in academic affairs to work on curriculum alignment and enhancing teaching and learning, and 9 staff in enrollment management and student affairs working on student financial aid, enrollment, recruitment, retention, student success, and importantly, student academic information systems. Additionally, we've hired 3 in guided pathways, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It's important to note that of the 48 additional staff that we plan to hire or transfer in the current fiscal year, all are expected to be members of the bargaining unit. And importantly, 32 of those staff are related to guided pathways. This funding also provides over $400,000 in faculty stipends for curriculum alignment work and implements guided pathways. I wanted to let you know that of these 37 staff, 1 is a durational position and administration technology. We've hired back a retiree for 120 days to help support our faculty with instructional technology, which is critical with distance learning. And there's also 10 interim positions, the bulk of which are in management, as we continue to define what the future of the structure should look like. Next slide. So this fulfills the beginning of our promise in Students First for guided pathways. By the end of the current fiscal year, 35 staff will be hired or transferred in to implement the holistic case management advising model on 3 campuses. As I mentioned, we've already hired 3 regional advising directors, and we've posted for 3 campus advising leads, 15 advisors at Housatonic, 9 at Middlesex, and 9 at Northwestern. We know that by making these investments, we can achieve the 250 students to 1 advisor ratio, which is critical, and we can have better student outcomes and help rebuild college enrollment through retention. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about our current hiring plan.
Any questions by members of either committee of Kelly? If hearing none, thank you very much, Kelly. Concise, to the point, and well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is review of the 2018 budget projections. Ben?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Carrie, and my regional colleagues for their presentations, and Keith. Recently, I wrote to the board correspondence which attempted to respond to a question that had been asked in a number of contexts regarding our progress compared to our plan with respect to the savings expected to be achieved under Students First. And this is an important question to ask. I fully understand why it's worth going back to the original plan from time to time to review your progress against it, especially when you're in a time when so many things seem to be going not according to plan based on the pandemic and enrollment and all the other problems that we faced in the last year. So the slides that are before, there was a memorandum which is in the board packet that provides more detail, but I pulled a couple of slides that are clippings from the original Students First substantive change that was submitted in March of 2018. That was the first detailed elaboration of our savings projections and how those would be accomplished. Many other features of that substantive change proposal, which I'm not speaking to on student success, but this was the first clear, fully formed projection of savings under the plan. The first slide is one of the attachments from that submission that includes the amount of savings that we had intended to achieve each year. And as you can see, although here you would note that this original plan had Students First going live on the 1st of July 2019. That deadline, the implementation of the change in accreditation has been pushed further into the future subsequent to this submittal. But many of the organizational changes are proceeding according to the original plan. As you can see that the cumulative savings that would be expected to achieve through the fiscal year is $14,052,000 out of a total of $24.8 million in savings that was identified. There were some additional savings that were expected that involved the universities, some efficiencies from purchasing and other things, which I'm not speaking to today. Those are relatively small, but the 24.8 was the number originally ascribed to the administrative consolidations that would be achieved. And here you can see those numbers. Again, this red line of the implementation costs and savings that we were, of the 24.8 that we would be expected to achieve, 14 of it would come in fiscal 21. Now, it's not clear here, but elsewhere in the document, it's clear that the $14 million in savings, this is PS and Fringe. I mean, there are minor amounts of savings from non-personnel items, but because so much of our budget is based on personal services expenses and Fringe, that's where that 14 million was expected to come from. So, and now, before I go, I'm going to show you the results of this. I think it's important to look at the fiscal 20 results first, as well as the 21 results. Fiscal 21 is in a work in progress still. We're presenting our mid-year budget projections later this meeting. But 20 was, at least fiscally, a generally normal year for us. We lost a little bit of revenue in the spring of fiscal 20 because of the shutdown of campuses. We lost some, incidental revenue from room rentals and, food sales and things like that. But we largely were unaffected from a tuition and fee standpoint in fiscal 20 because the pandemic really didn't hit until after registration and the semester had begun in the spring. So based on that, here's a comparison of the March projections from 2018, what the revenues and expenses would be and what the actuals were. You'll note here I've sort of updated the original chart from my memorandum to include the results from the mid-year were completed subsequent, which I think tell a similar story. But you can see in fiscal 20, which I blocked out in green, that we are actually very close to what we expected the revenues to be for the community colleges. 474.5 was our projection. We're at 473.9 in 2020. We're very I frankly attribute some of that to dumb luck. To project within 0.1%, 4 years into the future is very difficult to do with that level of reliability. But my predecessor was insightful, clearly, and got it right on that point. On expenses, there had been a prediction of 482.6. I'm just going to go back to the larger, the 482.6. On expenses, you can see is right here. So that's in the spending plan that we had. So the 482.6, our actual expenses were lower than that at 477.4, but relatively close, within about 1%. So I feel as though through 2020, we were on target for Students First with remarkable precision. I give enormous credit to my predecessor for the accuracy of our projections. For fiscal 21, things have gotten a little different. They've gotten a little rocky because of the pandemic. So the first big change is that our revenues, we're anticipating revenues of 470.5. The original plan then called for revenues of 492. I would also point out that the original revenue projections did not assume increases in tuition and fee rates in the community colleges, but I believe we've had 2 years of small increases since then. So we would have actually expected to outperform that 492 and be more about the $500 million range in revenues based on that change alone. But in fact, we're at 470 million. We had a precipitous drop off in revenue, which I'll describe more in discussing the mid-year. But I would point out that the colleges have so far been very effective at controlling our spending in response to that. So we're anticipating spending this year just under 500 million, which is in line with the expenses that were anticipated in the original study of the original projection of 502.6. So there's more information in the memorandum that I provided to you. I also did an analysis of attrition, which points to us having saved about $14 million, $13 to $14 million in annualized attrition. So that's the sum total of all the people who left our outside of faculty. This is a non-faculty analysis. The data on faculty is much more difficult to draw conclusions from because of the way we track full and part-time faculty and within our financial systems. But if you sum up the salaries of the people who retired or resigned or were fired or a few isolated cases passed away, compared to the salaries of the people that we've hired since Students First was first introduced, it comes to the difference is about $13.5 million. And that information is provided there as well. So that's the overview of the comparison to the 2018 budget projections, and I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Any questions by members of either committee for Ben?
Chair Balducci, we have a question from David Blitz.
Thank you. Referring to your chart on page 30, under implementation costs for the one community college, could you explain how that is reduced from 1 million in FY19 to 100,000 in FY22? I mean, naively, I would assume that under implementation costs, you would have the cost of the interim president, provost, vice presidents of the CSCC, as well as the 3 regional presidents and all the other positions which were presented earlier in the meeting.
Professor Blitz, could you please refer me to the location of that again?
Yeah, it's page 30 of your packet. It's the chart that you displayed.
Oh, it was, okay.
It's the one you just discussed. Under implementation costs. It seems to me that the
wait, it says, you mean where it says including implementation of Students First?
Yes. The implementation costs.
Implementation costs identified in the original 2018 study, but they were relatively small because the folks who completed that analysis considered things like the salary of the regional presidents to be part of the ultimate cost of Students First. So in the slide that's up, the identification of this as including implementation of Students First is because in the study there were 2 sets of multi-year financial projections included. One of which is sort of a baseline if we do nothing, and the other of which is included the implementation of Students First. And so I was simply identifying that these revenue and expense projections were made in March of 2018 on the assumption that Students First would go forward. I can go back and find, and I'd be happy to provide to the board, an identification of those direct implementation costs, but they tended to be around technology and related costs. I'm not sure that they have, I'm happy to provide their original estimate. I suspect that some of those costs may have been slightly higher than that, but I haven't done a direct comparison of that subset. They're frankly a much smaller piece of the overall cost structure going forward or during the transition than the changes in wages and salaries, which is what I'm comparing here. Any other questions?
I would have assumed that the salaries of new positions at the level of the CSCC would have been included in implementation costs. That was why I was asking the question. You seem to be saying that you only include in implementation costs technology changes that would be required. Is that correct?
Implementation costs were identified in the original study as temporary, like costs that were only during the transition. So, you know, the cost of you know, to use sort of an overly simplified metaphor, the cost of designing the new letterhead, but not the cost of printing letterhead forevermore. We assume that we're going to print letterhead. I mean, we actually use much letterhead these days, but that it was simply about the one-time costs of transition. Most of those were technological, although I think there was a small marketing component or changing the website to reflect the new college arrangement. But they did not include costs that were assumed to recur and continue after the merger had occurred, after the merger had taken place. Whether that was the right way to do it, I don't know. That was how it was done in 2018.
Any other comments by members of the committee? Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for that presentation. Now we're going to move on to the action items. And the first item on the agenda is acceptance of the gift to Northwestern Community College. You have the resolution before you. It's some $356,000 plus from Wendy Bagansky in behalf of her husband. And I would ask for a motion to accept the gift from Northwest Community College.
I would move that we accept this wonderful gift from Northwestern Community College.
Thank you, Joanne. Is there a second?
Felice, and I second.
Thank you very much. Any comments by members? Joanne?
Yes, thank you. Needless to say, this is wonderful news, especially during this challenging period. But it just is a testimony to the strength of that community college and other community colleges around our state, that people know how important it is and what great benefits there are by supporting that wonderful institution. So I'm delighted that to read about this, and I know it will be well used. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanne. Any other comments? We have a motion and a second for adoption of the resolution. Hearing no other comments, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The resolution's adopted. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a payment plan for the exception of COVID extension, which we had done, by the way, last year. And this is just an extension of that. Ben, why don't you just update us on it, please?
Yes, sure. Last April, we made a temporary change to our policy regarding refunds for the community colleges based on feedback from campuses. There was an indication that a number of students were struggling to enter into payment plans that would be completed by the end of the semester, which is our normal policy. So you cannot sign up if you still owe money from a prior semester. That has been our longstanding approach. And because a number of students were having some financial difficulty and we were trying to find ways to be more flexible, we allowed students during this through the fall of 2020 to enter into payment plans that extended out for a whole calendar year up to $1,200 to pay that back. So it was then understood that those payment plans might still be in effect when the students were coming in to register for a subsequent semester. And that is proving to be the case. So we have students who are enrolling this spring, who haven't enrolled this spring, who are still making payments on a payment plan from last fall, for instance. While this has downsides and problems, namely the accumulation of debt on the part of our students and the deferment of revenue to the institutions, we felt that the circumstances of the pandemic made that a better approach than to restrict those students from re-enrolling. At the time, we decided to only have it effect through the fall semester. We have didn't know the course of the pandemic. We had no idea. We're predicting an uncertain future. Now, however, with the pandemic still governing our operations in 2021, I sent out a poll of the campus CEOs to inquire about what their interest in extending this provision through the spring and to allow students now to enter into longer payment plans. While I don't think it was quite universal because a few people didn't get back to me, I heard from, I think, 12 community college CEOs who are all enthusiastic in their support for continuing this policy for another semester. So this will ultimately create some students who owe us some money, and that's an issue that we are considering, and we'll come back up again when we talk about the federal financial assistance that we've received. But we think that this continues to be an important temporary measure we can make to ensure that students are able to continue their education even as they go through personal or family financial hardships.
Thank you, Ben. And I think it's important we had support from the leaders in community colleges. And there is a cap of $1,200. I can't remember if you just mentioned that on this, and hopefully it will remain below that. It can, however, I think, go above that with the permission of the president of the CEO from the community college if necessary. And I think we do a great deal of, I think it's a great deal beneficial to particularly those students of lower income and minorities who really want to go earn a degree, but having some difficulty. And you're right, we could get caught with some dollars in the end, but in the overall big picture, I think the end of this is more beneficial than the negative portion of it. So with that, are there any other comments? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion for adoption of the resolution. Joanne? Thank you, Joanne. And second, Felicia? Thanks, Felicia.
Yes, sir.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution's adopted. The last item on our agenda deals with the acceptance of the fiscal 21 mid-year projections. Ben?
Hang on, I'm just clicking all my buttons here. Thank you for that. Before I go into this report, I would like to express my sincere thanks to all the folks who are involved in this at the campus level, the CFOs of the state universities, our budget staffs, the 3 regional fiscal officers who were instrumental in pulling this together and helped make some real improvements in the quality of the information we're providing to you. I want to thank all of them. Obviously, Valentina and her staff at the system office, finance, the budget office have been deserve a lot of credit for pulling this together in a relatively short time. This year, we deferred the mid-year budget report into February, and in fact deferred the deadline for reporting from the campuses as late as we could until very early February in order to garner the most up-to-date financial information, particularly around revenues. As you know, in the community colleges in particular, enrollment often occurs late in the process. I believe today is census day, if I'm correct. I think it is. So up until today, students have had the ability to sign up for classes and been working to have them do that. So it's important that we get as long as possible in order to good information about revenues. So I'm going to run through just a few slides. Obviously, there's a lengthy narrative report, including reports from each of the 4 universities and each of the regions, which I encourage you to read, but I will not be reading to you today, instead focusing on some system-wide highlights and taking your questions. The slide I have up here has to do with the state university system. As you can see, the state university system is projecting revenue down about $16 million compared to the budget. We recall we reduced the spending in the mid-year budget as well. I mean, in the revised budget. So the $719 million revenue was down from $725 million that we had started the year hoping for, which was down from where we ought to have been in prior years as well. So 725 was our average last year, I mean. So we are continuing to see weakness in revenue within the university system. There's a small impact there on tuition and fees, as well as housing and food services. Sorry about the extra R in housing. It's not horsing, it's housing. On the expenditure side, they have been obviously all the universities are keenly aware of the need to preserve their resources going forward, and have been reducing expenses in order to limit the impact. I'm sorry, let me do that. In order to limit the impact on the balancing of their budgets. So their projected deficit has reduced. We had originally thought it was going to be $50 million when we revised the budget in October. It's down to 36 million. Before I want to make a caveat. This chart does not consider the impacts of what I'm going to refer to as HEERF 2, which is the second round of federal funding directed to CSCU. I'll be discussing that a little bit further on. So it does consider the expense reductions made under HEERF 1, the CARES Act funding that was received last year. A good example of that is if you look at the $15 million drop in all other expenses. Originally, some of those other expenses were contained, for instance, the costs of moving students out of dormitories after the close of the cost of fixing dormitories up for students to occupy last fall. Some of those expenses were charged to were covered and reimbursed by the federal government. So from the expenses that are presented here. So this does include last year's federal money, but not this year's federal money. The community colleges, a similar story in that revenue has continued to decline. We're projecting a $13 million drop in revenue, including a further 6% drop in tuition and a precipitous drop in all other revenue. All other revenue includes the offset for bad debt expense, for reserve for uncollectible debt. I want to give a special credit, the Chief Regional Fiscal Officer, to point back to the presentation made by the regional presidents. This year, because we could see at a high level that our student receivables were climbing in a way that was a cause for concern, obviously, given the item we just recently adopted, or that you just adopted. We asked the regional finance officers to work with the controller and to ensure that each of the campuses was applying a similar appropriate methodology to determining what reserves for uncollectible debt would be applied in this updated forecast. And there was a significant growth in our reserve for uncollectible debt once we began calculating it in a uniform way. Some of the campuses were much more conservative than others, and have been historically, but this allows us to have a uniform view of the likelihood that we will have uncollectible debt based on evaluation across all the campuses and in consultation with our controller. And they determined exactly how that approach ought to work and ensured that it was applied uniformly across the campuses. So that's one of the reasons you see that significant drop in fact, it shows up as a negative revenue because there is such a large reserve for uncollectible debt included within that number. Overall, the colleges their position deteriorated because of the loss in revenue. Losing $13 million in revenue, we offset that with a reduction in spending. The total impact is that our operating deficit we think is going to grow from 16.5 million to 22 million this year. So we were able to cut spending, but not enough to offset the drop in revenue since we last checked in. Again, there is some good news in subsequent slide having to do with federal revenue that will help mitigate some of these current year deficits. So this is just where we are in enrollment actual to our projection. These enrollment projections are based on, are tied to the revenue projections that you can see. The final enrollment numbers may be a little bit different than this once we get past census day and tally up all the numbers. But you can see there is a significant drop, especially in the community. Well, Charter Oak is holding steady, thank heavens. The community colleges, as you can see, are taking a significant haircut on enrollment. And this is going to be a challenge for a generation of administrators and board members in the community colleges, how to restore our FTE enrollment. As I've said in the past, the community colleges make a lot more sense financially when we get closer to 30,000. But unfortunately, right now, the pandemic has pushed us in the other direction, and we are getting down toward 20,000 FTE students. And so the recovery of that is going to be a challenge. The universities, the problem is not as acute in enrollment, but is a significant drop off. And they are going to be also struggling to regain enrollment this fall and thereafter. I think it's always helpful to remind us what we spend where we get our money and what we spend it on. So I put in these slides again. Because of the drop in tuition, our tuition and student fees are actually a smaller share than they normally are. State support has grown. I'm very appreciative that, unlike many states, the state of Connecticut did not make mid-year cuts to our appropriations. We should be, that's one of the brighter spots here. Housing and food, student fees and tuition, those have all been going down. All of the revenue shows up at zero, in part because that includes bad debt expense, but also because all the other revenue includes many things like room rentals, auxiliary revenues for one thing or another that, in the case of the community colleges, food service and things like that. Obviously, there's none of that available any longer because the campuses are significantly closed, so that we're not none, but very little of that available. I apologize for that one. That one seems to have gotten a little screwed up. This is what we spend our money on. I'll try to repair that slide. I don't know why it's done that. You can see salary and fringe continue to make up the largest share of our expenses. I'll make sure that is correctly displayed in the version that is posted after the meeting. So this slide shows what our projected reserves are based on the projection that I've just provided. And then in the lower box, well, throughout, I've tried to incorporate the effects of the federal funds that we're receiving. So I'm going to walk through this chart a little carefully because it does include a lot of important information. So you can see our adjusted UNP. You note that in the staff report, I identified this as audited, and I've been corrected by my staff that the auditors don't audit our UNP as we present it, but it is based on audited expenditures and audited revenues, subject to the finalization of the community college audit once we receive remaining foundation financial reports. But the UNP is the measure that we have traditionally used for our reserves, and I will continue to use it, although we're looking at whether there's a better way to measure reserves. And if we come up with one, we will certainly bring it before you. So UNP, as of the end of last fiscal year, was 118 million for the universities, 32.5 million for the community colleges, and just about 6 million for the Charter Oak State College. Based on this, we anticipate losing 36 for the universities, 22 for the community colleges, and about 117 for Charter Oak. Charter Oak's losses are largely because they've had to double down on their marketing expenses this year in order to ensure that they maintain market share in a very competitive year for online education. But they have done so, and their revenues are holding up, but they have a small deficiency expected this year. In addition, we anticipate being able to use a fair amount of our HERE 2 money, as the new money that was approved on December 28th, for lost revenue replacement. These numbers are estimates. The numbers I have here are strictly preliminary estimates in order to, so I can disclose to you what those numbers look like. We think that we will be able to seek reimbursement for about 30 million worth of lost revenues at the universities. And actually, it'll be a little higher than that at the colleges. Here it's just 28 million. There's also some HERE 1 funds, about $13 million that we will apply to lost revenue as well. That's included in our balanced budget, or in our budget forecast. So you can see that with the addition of the lost revenue reimbursement from the federal government, our reserves at the end of this year, I'm projecting at 112 million for the universities, 38 million for the colleges, and just under 6 for Charter Oak State College. This is good news on both fronts. First of all, for the universities to end the year over 100 million in reserves. I think we had, as recently as December, thought that those were going to be down in the under 100 million. This puts them well up over 100 million, even though they've suffered additional revenue weakness in the spring. The community colleges, if we can end the year with reserves of $38 million, that positions us very well to survive what will be a couple of difficult years as we struggle to regain enrollment. We are in, as I said, with enrollment now pushing down toward 20,000 FTEs, we should anticipate either additional requirements that we spend money in order to shore up our enrollment, either through guided pathways and retention and efforts like that, through additional financial aid for students, or for other initiatives that we think are going to help us to bring those students back and have them be successful. And frankly, we may also need to replace lost revenue in the fall and through the next several years, depending on the length of time it takes us to rebuild our enrollment. In addition to these funds, this projected reserves in the top box. In the bottom box, I'm pointing out that there are some other areas of funding, some other pieces of federal funding that do not impact our reserve levels for June 30th, but are worth noting. First, last year we gave out 13 million in student financial assistance at the universities and about 14 at the colleges. That's already out the door. If not 100%, then 99%. There may be a few students we're tracking down, but those funds have been awarded. In the community, I think there were mostly in the spring, although there are some residual amounts that were awarded last fall. Now, with the new federal assistance, we are intending to make provide those amounts in student financial assistance again, and to do that this spring. We are all, the universities and the colleges and Charter Oak is newly eligible for student financial assistance, you can see, are all working to develop plans that will provide that student financial assistance this March. So we are going to be sending money out to students in March. We're still working out the specifics in each case. The one change from the last round of student financial assistance is that this is required to be, what's the phrase they use, to prioritize extraordinary need. So this must be needs-based. The university's program in the last year was needs-based. It gave a higher amount to students who were eligible for Pell. The colleges, we gave the same amount out to everybody. It was has been described to be the peanut butter approach, spread it out across the student body. with a couple of exceptions related to federal eligibility requirements. So that's what we did in the colleges in the last year, but here in 2021, it needs to be needs-based. So we're in the process of developing that. We need to look at the final census figures, which we should have, and by the beginning of March, we will have a methodology developed for sharing those funds with students. In addition, I am currently estimating that there will be about $23 million of federal funds remaining within the colleges only. The universities will fully utilize their HERF grant between lost revenue in the current year, expense reduction in the expense reimbursement in some cases in the current year, and student assistance. In the colleges, we believe that once we've drawn down our lost revenue and we've awarded the minimum amount for student aid, the 14 million this spring, there will remain $23 million of assistance available that can be used for either student financial assistance or reimbursement for eligible COVID-related expenses to the institution. We have a whole year to do that. So we're going to take a look at whether we should be using it. We may ultimately defer some of that funding to be used in the upcoming fiscal year for student financial assistance in the fall, or for lost revenue in the fall if we believe that's an issue. But that is an open question that we get to consider going forward, and I certainly ultimately will come to you all for determination. But I wanted to be very clear about the disposition, as far as we know, of those federal funds. Oh, that's a separate chart. So that's the conclusion of my mid-year report, but I know there may be many questions. There's a lot more information in the staff report, and I'd be happy to take questions from the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions, Joanne?
Ben, first of all, thank you for that very excellent comprehensive report, and your numbers are amazing. But I do have a quick question. This is you probably all know this, but is the enrollment at the community colleges, does that include the students who are taking 1 and 2 courses when they did not return to the college or go on to college out of the area?
I'm not trying to understand your question. Say that again.
Those students, I know there were a number of students who were accepted out of state colleges, but because of the COVID, they chose not to go. So instead, they are taking 1 and 2 courses. And I don't know if they've enrolled in the community college. Can you just take a course without full enrollment? And is that number counted?
Yes, you certainly can. And those numbers are based on what we call FTE enrollment. So those are, if you only took 1 class, you don't show up as a 1 FTE, you show up as a part of an FTE. I mean, you would show up as about a quarter of an FTE. Because that assumes I think the FTE calculation assumes a 12 credit load, so 4 courses. It does not include students who are in non-credit courses. So it does not include the non-credit courses that are offered, assumed to be sort of budget neutral. That's an assumption that I hope we all have an opportunity to poke around at in the coming years. But it is assumed that the cost of operating a non-credit course is covered by the tuition paid by those students. So to the extent it goes up and down, it has less of an impact on our overall budget. Whereas the enrollment I'm describing is students enrolled in credit-bearing courses at the community colleges, whether it's full or part-time.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Then my other comment, and this is more of a suggestion perhaps, but I really feel there is a tremendous need during this time to reach out very, very strongly to our area high schools, special schools, in that there are kids whose parents are discouraging them from going on to private schools or schools out of state or colleges and universities that are not part of our system because of the cost. But there's some stigma or something about going to a community college, and that really does bother me. And I witnessed it at one of our meetings a year ago in our chamber, a school to career meeting, and one of the career counselors said, "Oh, I would never encourage a child to go to Northwestern Connecticut Community College." Well, you can imagine my response. So I really do feel there has to be some kind of a campaign to let people know that this is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And I know there are many kids who really are kind of at loose ends because they just don't know what to do. They don't, if they're doing remote classes, their parents don't want to spend $70,000 for them to sit on a campus just to do something remotely when they could be working part-time perhaps and going to school. So I just don't know if we're doing enough aggressively to reach out to the parents as well as the students.
I entirely agree with you, Regent Ryan. I believe that there is an enormous untapped number of students who are not participating right now. And it is absolutely going to be our challenge to find ways to bring them back to the community colleges and the universities both. I know that I have heard I've heard both very positive and very pessimistic, views of the future from my colleagues around the country when I participate in national, thinking about this. There is a general belief that the regional public universities are well positioned for a resurgence of interest in the fall, that there are lots of students who really want to go back to campus and want to be, want that college experience, and that the regional publics may benefit from that. You'll note in the current pandemic, the regional publics have taken it much harder than the UConns of the world. I don't mean to pick on UConn; they're a fine institution, but the sort of flagships and land grant universities have held up on enrollment much better than regional public universities have. We serve many more minority students who tend to be, I think, more apprehensive about going to school during the pandemic, and there may be other barriers that we could discuss. The colleges, I've also, in general, have always performed well during economic downturns. It takes a while for that to take effect, and clearly it did not take effect during this school year because of the pandemic. When I am wearing my optimistic hat, I think, well, this summer, we'll get the pandemic under control, and we'll be going back to operations that are more comfortable to our potential students, and that they will come back quickly. But it may not be the case. We have very many people in the business have made predictions about the future over the past year that have turned out to be wrong. So I'm very uncertain, but I absolutely agree that that marketing is a key effort for us, and it is on my list of things we need to address in the budget that we present to you in a couple months. That we include robust outreach and marketing efforts as part of our to gain enrollment.
Thank you. David, you had a question?
Yes, I had a question. It goes back to the October financial packet, where there was, among the various items not directly distributed to a community college, there was the shared services item of $37 million. And where has that gone to in the spreadsheets that you presented today?
Shared services, hang on. Shared services are if you look on page 64 of 87 in the packet.
I've just lost my packet. Hang on a second.
Or I'm sorry, 64 or 65. 64 is the revised budget, and 60. 5 of 87 is fiscal 21 projection. As you can see, we are projecting expenditures of $35.3 million in shared services, down from 37 in the revised budget. So we are underspending. We're projecting a slightly lower spending in the shared services area. Shared services are up and running. We have payroll is up and running now, and we are in the process between now and April 1st of transitioning accounts payable and purchasing over into shared services. Those are sort of in process right now. There are some other shared services that are being implemented in the area of enrollment management. Those will be reflected in the budget that is presented to you. We'll identify how those costs are being accounted for in the budget that you receive. I believe the current plan calls for budget adoption in later this spring. Which month?
Thank you. That's helpful. As a follow-up, that budget, who controls that budget? Is it the CSCU system office, the CSCC system office, the 3 regional presidents? How is that done?
Well, I do consider it to be one of my responsibilities to make sure that that budget is in order and is being accurately counted and presented. However, we have established for this budget largely covers shared services in the finance area. The shared services are governed by a shared services committee that reviews and implements and comments on and adjusts service level agreements covering the services that are provided. And ultimately, I believe will be the area that we will ask that all these were put in place during the course of this year. So it's not the cleanest year because they were not in effect at the time that the budget was first presented to the board. But we will be asking the governance committee, which is actually chaired by Gennaro DeAngelis, who's one of the regional finance officials who drew the short straw to get to chair another committee. But he has been very capably doing that. We have folks from all the different campuses and CFOs from the universities as well as within the college system. We will present a proposed budget to them and get their approval of and recommendation of a budget for shared services that will be incorporated into the budget presented to the board later this spring. Obviously, if the budget presented to the board is ultimately Dr. Gates's responsibility and my responsibility, to the extent that if she believes that we need to vary from what's recommended by the committee, we are free to do so, but we would call that to your attention. I don't anticipate that happening.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions by members of either committee? If not, then I want to thank you, Valentina and her group and everyone on both committees for being part of this. I look forward to seeing you all at the board meeting. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn if there's no other business.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I might, I had an opportunity this morning to put together a summary of the state aid proposal that came from that was embedded in the government budget proposal, and I'd be happy to walk through that. I know that wasn't initially on the agenda, but it has enormous bearing on the mid-year projections. It came out obviously last week. I'm happy to take any questions. While I have the committee here, I'm happy to address that if there's any interest in that as well.
Actually, I think it probably would be by members, so why don't you go ahead with that then before we adjourn, please?
The This is a preliminary comparison of current year support on various areas and what we'd requested and what was approved by the governor. There are a couple of areas of concern for us and a couple of areas that are positive. The top, I circled the 3 block grants up at the top, those 3 charter oak community colleges and state universities. As you can see, we requested increases, and those increases generally were not provided. So the numbers are status quo. The community college slightly lower than we're receiving this year, and more or less level funded throughout. One item that is especially difficult to in this is that in fiscal 23, in the second year of the biennium, there is a 27th payroll. Because of the way the calendar breaks down every 10 years, we have an extra pay date in a fiscal year. Many state agencies were given additional funds to make that additional payroll. We were not. Neither was UConn. And a number of sort of self-supporting entities in state government were not given that. That explains the significant, the $10 million increase at the state universities and the larger increase in the community colleges was in part related to that 27th payroll that was not funded. Overall, I think that's about $12 million a year. I mean, for that 27th payroll, if I'm remembering correctly. Another area, they didn't fund us at all for workers' compensation, but that's actually kind of a blessing. I believe that they have moved the responsibility for paying our workers' comp costs over to DAS, who runs the program statewide. So that is, that doesn't really have any impact. The money goes away, but so does the responsibility to pay. The second blue box is the Community College Operating Fund Fringe paid by the state. Starting in fiscal 21, I believe, we've been receiving $36.5 million in supplemental fringe benefit support for the community colleges. That increase that we received this year in fiscal 21 was a lifesaver for us in many respects. It came at a moment when we absolutely needed that additional assistance. They have reverted back. There were 2 pieces to that, one for 16 million and one for 22 million. Or for 20 million. The $20 million portion has not been renewed or has not been recommended to be renewed in the governor's budget. This is set back for us and has some significant consequences, and we'll be certainly seeking to get the legislature to restore that supplemental fringe benefit support. On the good side, they did award us $6 million in each of the 2 years for the PACT program. We are, again, once we see census over the next 2 weeks, we are going to attempt to make a new updated projection of what of what that gets us with the PACT program. It's pretty clear $6 million a year is not going to provide us with enough money to fully fund the program. I mean, we're funding it at $6 million this year, and we have, it's not a universal program. It's first come, first served. And while many have been served, many have not been able to get those scholarships. So that's good news, but not as much good news as we would have hoped for, but certainly good news. And those are, the last thing I would point out is that I know that there, one of the concerns that we have, the governor's budget includes a great deal of interplay between funding for necessary expenses across state government and the application of federal assistance. So there have been a number of areas where the governor's budget recommends using the federal funds to meet the extraordinary costs of the pandemic, appropriately so. I am concerned, though, that the federal assistance that the CSCU has received or may continue to receive, there may be further stimulus packages with support for higher education, that to the extent that we receive those, I am concerned that while that's necessary and will help us to avoid depleting our reserves during a very difficult year, they are, in my view, not good replacements for recurring assistance in areas like fringe benefits. The federal assistance is one time, well, maybe we'll get two, we've gotten two pieces of it, maybe we'll get a third, but it's not likely, that third is undoubtedly going to be the final one. We don't see a recurring source of revenue from the federal government coming out of the pandemic. Instead, it's one-time funds. And it is somewhat concerning that we would use that to replace critical recurring assistance from state government. So we're going to continue to raise that point and make it clear to legislators and others that that we have extraordinary expense and needs as a result of the pandemic, and that we're going to use the federal funds to address those. But that we will hope for and will continue to need recurring assistance from state government.
Thank you, Ben. Just the $20 million that you talked about trying to recoup, so to speak, through the legislature, is still going to leave us quite a bit short for 22 and 23 fiscal years. Are we going to be able to manage that? I mean, I understand 20 million would be great. Any other thoughts as to where we could recoup other dollars to make up for the expenses?
Well, when we presented our biennial request, we indicated that we felt that we would have a shortfall in the community colleges of about, I'm sorry, I have it right here, of 27, on the right page. We had identified shortfalls of a total shortfall of about 75 million in 22 and 86 million in 23, and that was about for fiscal 22. It's about 47 million in the universities and about 27 million in colleges that we might run short next year, based on a assumption that will take us 3 years to get back to where we used to be on enrollment. Obviously, that is an assumption that was conservative, and we tried to come up with something that seemed reasonable to expect, but that wasn't very aggressive. We could do better than that, or we could do worse than that. That remains to be seen. But if we do only regain a third of our lost enrollment and occupancy in the case of the universities, we will have that deficit next year. There will be a little bit of money, as I described, in the community colleges, which we may be able to apply toward dealing with some of those revenue shortfalls next year. But that's by no means, we also will have needs to provide additional student assistance next year as a way to try to encourage greater enrollment and greater student success. So I don't believe that we are out of the woods by any means. I think that we are facing potential deficits next year based on enrollment, and that the amount of federal assistance that we have left over is not going to be sufficient to deal with those deficits. There's nothing left over in the case of the universities, and there is not enough left over in the case of the colleges to both meet the needs of our students and restore us to solvency in next year. So I am very concerned that we, something like a drop off in recurring fringe benefit assistance will simply be a drag. A reduction to our limited reserves in the community college area, and limited but slightly better off in the university area as well. So this continues is the reduction in supplemental fringe benefit support continues, it will result in, I believe, a likely drawdown of reserves back down to the dangerously low levels that we were worried about this year.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment. We're going to have to delve into reserves again if we don't get help. More help.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ben, thank you for that additional report. Not the brightest star in the sky, but thank you for that. The $6 million will help with the debt-free college, I know, and we appreciate that greatly. Any other comments? Hearing none, we already have a motion on the table for adjournment. With that, I would call for a vote on that. All those in favor of adjourning, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. Thank you all again for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.
Thank you.